Welcome back to Flying Upstream, the place where we follow the stories of those who dared to defy the current, not just to survive, but to live fully and freely. Today's guests are father and son. Their story began with experts, labels, and medications, and a school system that failed to see the brilliance just because it didn't come packaged in obedience. But after a spontaneous ski trip and years of relentless trial and error, they discovered that was what was needed wasn't more restriction. It was freedom, nature, movement, and a different kind of listening. From being restrained in therapeutic institutions to skiing all 91 routes of New Hampshire's backcountry, from Harvard hopes to van life and summiting Antarctica, this is a story of radical trust, parental awakening, and the healing power of mountains. Today's guest, the first guest, is DeLena. Did I get that right, DeLena?
Yeah.
Perfect. Is Ryan DeLena. He had a difficult time controlling his emotions as a child and was placed in therapeutic schools that relied on detrimental methods of behavior modification, such as physical restraint. Nothing helped from a team of doctors to heavy medication. Then in 2010, he was voluntarily committed to a mental hospital for further evaluation. His parents were counseled to place him in a group home, and they refused. After an impulsive decision to take him skiing, his dad, who is our other guest today, Robert, Rob for short, had made the decision to take him skiing. He discovered a different child than the version the experts were so sure about. By his second day of skiing, Ryan was executing advanced runs, and with each conquest in the winters that followed, his dad began to question the path laid by the professionals, and that sort of changed the game. But before we get into all of the beautiful stuff, I want to welcome you both, Ryan and Robert. Welcome to Flying Upstream.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure.
Mm.
Of course, Ryan. I want to start at sort of the beginning. So, from everything that we know, everything that I've learned about you, you were a smart kid, but you didn't listen in the way that the systems expected you to. What do you remember about being that child in a world that kept trying to fix you, essentially?
Well, it was interesting because you got to remember this started when I was like 4 or 5, so this is before I was in kindergarten, and it escalated quickly. Is the best way I can describe it because when you're that age, you don't really have concept of anything broader than the 5 minutes before and the 5 minutes after any given moment. So I was in school. I wasn't listening. Whenever I wanted to do something, I just did it. And normally, some, teacher assistant would get up and follow me around. And life felt great at that point. And they'd send me to the principal. Principal would say something to me. I wouldn't listen to them. They'd send me home with a red card that indicated I did bad. A green one would mean I did good, and my parents would take the red card and it'd be fine. And normally anything that I wanted to do felt more worth it than not doing it in exchange for a green piece of paper. What I didn't know is that I was going to be removed from society essentially at the age of 5, because behind the scenes they were talking amongst my parents and administrators about how much of a problem they anticipated me being, and that it wasn't even worth trying having me in public school, and that they wanted to move me to a therapeutic setting. And once you get moved into therapeutic schools, you can't just come back because you're going to a place where you have more aids than they can offer in public school. So in order to come back, you have to prove that you can exist without that. And of course, when I got there, they also started using detrimental punishment methods. They were physically restraining me, which essentially it looked like a WWE wrestling match between a 40-year-old teacher and a 5-year-old, if you can picture it. And it was happening anytime I acted up. So I went from it feeling like my actions had no consequences to all of a sudden my actions had a lot of consequences, both in that I was getting hurt every day, and also now I was stuck in this system that is really just a pipeline, from schools to prisons for kids. And I now needed to find a way out of this. And I'm caught in this whirlwind at the age of 5. So that's kind of my experience with that.
Wow. And what was that for you, Rob? Like as the parent, how did you experience that?
It's so hard to hear it even again, and it's, I think, if we were first time parents, right? So we were, and we were sort of these blue collar kids that did well, and we were in this suburban life that we, had worked so hard to attain. And Ryan comes along, and he's beautiful, and he's smart, and he's athletic, and he never listened, and he just did whatever he wanted. And I actually thought that was his best quality. I thought this kid's going to be, he's going to run the world because he just does whatever he wants. And but then you get into these public settings where you suffer some humiliations because he was the kid who wouldn't listen. He was the hardest kid at a birthday party, the worst kid at a pool. And you start to worry, and we started to kind of have an inkling that he was a little different than everybody else. And then once he got to school, and here's a kid who I had pegged for Harvard. This kid's gonna, he's brilliant, and he's going to do better than I did. And in preschool, when they're pulling you aside and saying, we think you need to have a neuropsychologist observe him. We think there's issues here, they start throwing around, terms. Back then it was sort of either autistic or not. And we knew he wasn't autistic, but there were behavioral challenges. That's a gut punch for a parent. I mean, all of your hopes and dreams are just, that's it, out the window. And I think that was our problem, was that we were so shattered by this image that he wasn't perfect that we immediately seized on trying to make him perfect. And when an expert comes along and says, this is a better school, this is a better system, we're going to hold him down on the ground when he misbehaves. And you think, okay, that makes some sense. I mean, that's just a terrible, terrible system. And so I don't understand why we were so easily led. As we've gone through this a number of times in talking about the book we wrote, I've had to relive this, and it really is questioned. I looked at myself a lot, and I've had to look at those, those vulnerabilities that why did I care so much what everybody thought about him? What, even if he did misbehave, who cares? He was 4 years old, he was 5 years old, or if the school come back and said, he didn't listen today, or he got in trouble today, I should have said, okay, well, you're going to have to deal with that. Tough luck. Instead of saying, oh my God, how do we fix this? Let's take him out of the system. And, and that was, bad decision number one, which led to some really terrible decisions after that. Yeah. So long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no, I love that answer because one, that's what we promote in the Flying Upstream community is, we have to start asking those questions when experts start telling us, do this, do that. Just because they're expert in what they do, it does not make them experts in our lives and in the way that we should live them. But we have all been conditioned to operate that way. So I really love that that you took the time to explain that because that is really important. Let's jump to the point where you did start questioning the experts. Rob, when did something happen that you were like, okay, maybe it's time to start looking at this differently?
I think the initial, when Ryan was sent to a therapeutic school where he was restrained every day, and they taught us to restrain him at home, and to hire back then it was I'll use the term a special needs nanny to restrain him at home. It was really those times when I was in a position where I was supposed to restrain him, and then I would get involved in this wrestling match on the floor with him, and it would go on forever. And then at the end, he would be crying, and I would be, sweating and upset. And I look back and think, what did that accomplish? Like, I don't even remember why he got in trouble. Like, why were we on the floor? And so for the first time, I think when you're put in that position and you say, something is wrong here. In my gut, I know this is wrong. And we stopped restraining him at home, and we started to question what the schools were doing. That was the first time. But just to fast forward the story a little bit, it really wasn't until, when we started to ski and Ryan and I were spending a lot of time together, and we were traveling a lot together, and I was alone with him a lot, and we would spend a lot of time, and all of these things that the school said he couldn't do, and he was doing so easily, and we were going through airports and hotels, and waiting for things, and skiing is one of those sports where the conditions can be great or can be terrible. He had to deal with disappointment, and he was so much better than me, and he had to sort of drag me around the mountain and deal with me being a whiner because I didn't want to do things, and I just saw this resilient kid who was doing everything they said he couldn't do, and it just opened my eyes to finally see him in a different light. And I think when we were stuck in this suburban world where everybody's kids were perfect and everybody was so conditioned to go to the next thing, and the schools were so conditioned, I think we were just trapped in that mindset. And it really took me being outside of my comfort zone, because I wasn't a skier. All of a sudden I was thrust into this world I didn't know, and he was the one who knew more than I did about most of the things. And I just started looking at him as in a very, very different light.
I love that. I love that so much. And Ryan, what was that like for you when the moment sort of changed, when you were now having these new experiences and you were no longer experiencing being weird and different when you were out here with your dad skiing and traveling? What was that like for you?
It's very interesting. Um, I remember just kind of knowing within the first couple days of skiing that this was going to be a really significant part of my life. I was already like, cool, I could be a ski patroller, I could be a ski guide, I could do something in the mountains, and I likely will. Pretty much from the first week of it, because it was really the first time I felt like I had a future in anything, and I just loved it so much. Um, in our book, we have a chapter called Parallel Tracks, which it's just one chapter in the book, but it was really a whole decade of my life where we called it that. It's kind of a play on words with skiing. You ski parallel style is kind of that's like the fourth level of skiing and ski instructing, is when you get the kids to stop making the pizza turns. But it was also kind of a metaphor for, I had two different lives that were running alongside each other. One where I was thriving at something, I was going around the country and then around the world and taking on some of the most challenging terrain at each place we went to, and getting all of this praise and having people tell me I was a natural at this thing and I had a future doing it. And then I would go home and I would be at school where I couldn't walk to the water fountain or go to the bathroom without someone standing by the door. Where if I spoke out of term or got up, I'd get put on the floor, where they could put me in a room with no windows or doorknob on my side and keep me in there after school hours. They could bring my parents there and tell them until I calmed down, they weren't allowed to let me out of that room. Um, and it was a really strange experience for me. And for a while, I just kind of dealt in my years of elementary school and middle school. I just kind of accepted that as how it was. And when I got to high school, and I started to be concerned with kind of fairness and justice in the world, and I also started meeting my sister's friends and sort of seeing what normal people's lives were like, I started to be really kind of obsessed with the fact that I had to go through this thing that other kids my age didn't. And not only that, but it wasn't for a particular reason. If I was out on the mountain, I didn't have to deal with this. I only had to deal with this when I went to school. And I was at the point where I was fed up, where I was like, going to school and intentionally making the teachers' jobs harder just because I felt like my situation was so unfair. I was trying to turn other kids against the system. One day I brought in a folder full of my sister's homework, and I was like showing them that we were all getting screwed, that we were getting work that was 2 grades below grade level. It was the same thing that my sister, who was, 16 months younger than me, was doing in her classes, and that when we all got to college, we were going to be screwed. And of course, you know, a lot of them were so conditioned to not believe in themselves by this point, they didn't even care. They were like, if we were in the world that everybody else was in, we would fail. So we have to be here. And it really was kind of a heartbreaking moment for me, because I realized I had to leave this world behind and I couldn't help anybody else that was in it. I could only help myself and anyone who wanted to be helped.
Yeah, what a big realization at a young age, right? Based on the way that society conditions kids to kind of think. And I think it's also really important to highlight here that, I mean, at least for me, and why we created this platform is it is so true that you cannot help anyone who does not want to help themselves and who is seeking help. There's only so much that you can do, and the rest is up to them. So I love that you shared that. Um, and I want to jump into something really exciting. So, a little bit of history about me. I'm Bostonian. I live in Texas now, but I'm Bostonian. And I lived in New Hampshire for 6 years before I moved to Texas. And I was just having this conversation with a friend not too long ago. One of the places I love the most that I've lived is New Hampshire. So, I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. I love hiking. That's why I was there for so long. You did not just, Ryan, you did not just become better. You like surpassed that. Talk to me about that and the 91. I don't know any skiing terms, but the 91 something that you
Lines.
did lines that you did in New Hampshire. How did that all come about?
Well, fast tracking the journey a little bit, I eventually did get back to public school, and I continued skiing throughout. I also discovered climbing, and got really into that as a summer sport and as a winter sport with ice climbing and ski mountaineering. And I went to Northern Vermont University and enrolled in an outdoor education degree, where not only was I learning to do this for a living now, but I was also much closer to the mountains. And I've always been somebody who's been driven by challenges. I've also been very
Right, you're
adventurous.
breaking up a little. Right. I don't know if you can do anything about your signal, Ryan, but
Oh,
it's really not great.
A little bit.
Your audio is breaking up a little bit. I'll jump in for a sec while he's fixing it. Part of what the change was when you start skiing in resorts, right? And you probably have been to Loon and Cannon or heard of these when you were in New Hampshire. You know, for me, he always wanted to do the hardest runs in all of those mountains. So I was bad. I was a beginner too, and he was way better than I was. So little by little, I started to get better. And just when I became a pretty competent resort skier, he decided to ski in the backcountry. You know, in the backcountry, there's no airlift, there's no helicopter, there's no, you have to climb the mountain yourself to ski down. So he started to force me to do some of that, which, I was about 20 pounds heavier and living a much different life at that point. And I was not really in the shape to climb up the mountain myself to ski down. But he took to that as much as he took to regular skiing. He really loved the backcountry. And that's when Mount Washington is Tuckerman Ravine. You probably heard Tuckerman. That's sort of the first signature backcountry run. A lot of people do. It's sort of a rite of passage. But for Ryan, it just opened up this whole world of what's back there that no one really realizes back there. And Ryan, did you hear all that? I'm trying to set you up for the intro.
Can you hear me at all? Hang on, I'm turning on Starlink.
Okay. And so after we did Tuckerman the first time together, and he almost killed me. I almost stroked out. I mean, we went to carry these heavy packs up, and I was just flop sweat, and I just whined the whole way, and I said to him, I'm never doing that again. Because you literally hike for like 6 hours and you ski for like 60 seconds. I mean, the math is just insane. And I'm exaggerating, but it's a lot more hiking than it is skiing. And it's really hard. But people loved it. There are just people who love it. And they love the aspect of going up the mountain as much as they do love going down. And it's you really have to be a special person, I think. The way you go up the mountain, just for your listeners, it's called skinning up the mountain most of the time. You take your skis and they're almost like cross country skis. So your toes stay in, but your heels lift. And you put this material, felt material on the bottom so that you don't slide backwards. So when you advance each step, you kind of, it hooks and you stay in place. But you literally have to go step by step up the mountain. And so when Ryan started to first discover that, not only is there Tuckerman Ravine back there, but the Presidential Range has a series of peaks. All of the peaks have different trails. And there's 91 possible runs back there, according to somebody who wrote a guidebook and tried to identify all of them. And Ryan was the first person to ever decide to ski all 91. And there's a lot of history back there. I mean, people have been skiing up there, since probably the 20s and 30s. And so we really we didn't know for sure if anyone had done all of them, but we're pretty sure Ryan's the first. Right? Any better? Right? How's your signal now? Oh, that seems
Okay,
worse.
we can't hear us.
Yeah.
So did you do all 91 with him too?
No, so I've done probably 2 or 3. So
That's
when
amazing.
we did when he got close, it wasn't we weren't sure he was ever going to be able to do all 91 because there's some that just don't form. You take out a special snow year or a certain ice year, or, and the conditions vary. And he really started to get close. And entering this winter, he had about, I don't know, 10 or 15 to go. And we had signed on with a company that was going to do a documentary about the book, but then we tied it into finishing this project because he would be the first person to do it. And so I went for the last when he had the last one to do. I went up with him, and I stood there and just watched them come down. And they I don't want to spoil it because it's going to be a great scene in the documentary. I got really emotional, and I had spent so many days with him, and we would go to each of these resorts, and he always had like one run. It's a little better. One run that he had to do. It's still kind of rough, but
Crack, yeah.
no. And so even then there, we're finally in this backcountry thing. And I was so, if he fell or it didn't work, it was going to really just be such a disappointment. So it was really for me, to see him finally accomplish it. And he's so young and he's got so much more to do. But yeah, we can hear you, buddy. But you really the audio is really
crackled, very crackled.
I don't know what's happening. I'm on the Starlink. Wait, can you hear me now? Just stop.
Try turning off your video. See if turning off your video lets us at least hear you.
Does this work?
That's my my non-technical suggestion.
Yeah. No, let's see. All right, say something, right? Let's hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. It's crackled a bit.
So I don't know what's happening. I haven't changed locations at all. I have turned on my Starlink. I might, if it doesn't get any better and if it's going to ruin it, I might just have to bail out. And that's really upsetting because I've never had anybody ask me about this project.
What if you log out and then try to log back in?
Yeah. I said it's
back in the world, but I might have to leave this meeting, and either you can do it without me or reschedule another time. So I'm sorry to disappoint you.
All right, well, close out, and then maybe try to log back in a minute.
Yep. Give it like a couple minutes. Close it. Maybe shut down your computer. Restart. Okay. And I'm always happy to have him back. I'm very excited to hear about all of this. This is so exciting to me. So, but let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned the documentary. You mentioned the book. So how did those come about? So obviously part of your journey with Ryan. At what point did you realize this is truly special and we should be documenting this in one way or another?
So, he mentioned sort of the parallel tracks, but as skiing got better, school really didn't. I mean, we were in a system that once he left the system, our town of Sudbury, Mass was really reluctant to bring him back and gave us a hard time. It took 10 years to get him back to public school. So, we had this series of therapeutic schools, one to the next. The other piece I'll mention is, he was on a lot of medication, and after the hospital, he at any one time he was on 2 or 3 different antipsychotics, and he got really heavy from some terrible medicines, and we sort of faced that decision to medicate him. I think all too quickly, all too easily. Again, hoping that they were going to wave some magic wand and he was going to be a regular kid again. And so, a lot of that stuff played out. But in the meantime, we're traveling the world. We end up in Antarctica, and when we were traveling to Antarctica, we were on a boat and we didn't have Wi-Fi for the first time, and we just started talking. And I said, Ryan, you got a pretty compelling story. I think we could try to write it and turn it into a book. I said we have nothing to do right now. Let's just start right now. I'm going to start writing about, your first school, and you write about your first school, and write about your second school and third school. And so we'll meet in the middle somewhere. And so I started, he didn't really start going, and until we got back. And so I wrote, Ryan, I can just finish it, but if you want.
Yeah, and we can have you on another time too, so we can share it twice. I'm very excited.
And so well, I had like 100 pages, and he had a few pages, and after about 6 months or a year, I showed him what I had written, and he hated what had written, because I was so angry with
I think it
I think
worked.
that. Oh, that sounds good.
Oh my god, it worked.
Uh,
Yes,
Do you have like an editor? Can we get
we
all of that
do.
out of there somehow?
We do. We have two video and audio editors, so
Oh,
we'll
thank God.
yeah.
Cool. I'd love to try this again because oh man. Wow. Wow. You don't understand. I was so upset. I was like, I finally get to talk about something that's actually fun on one of these, like something that's actually going to like be enjoyable for me to talk about. And this happens. Like, I don't
No,
know.
let's go. We can pick up right where we left off. We were
Perfect.
talking about your dad has shared a lot of insight, but obviously it's all from his perspective, and we can jump right back to where we were. So you can share all of that.
Cool. I remember so I was in college. I went to college across two different campuses over the time I was there. So I was between 2.5 to 1.5 hours from Mount Washington for much of the time there. And really, before I even got to college, I had discovered that uphill was what I wanted to do. And by uphill, I mean climbing mountains for the purpose of skiing them, not taking the lifts, getting to the train that you can only get to if you climb the mountain. And I had watched so much material from YouTube, particularly Andrew Drummond, who is my local ski hero, about the terrain we had on Mount Washington, the most famous of which is Tuckerman Ravine. But beyond that is about 11 or so other ravines that all have challenging skiing. And this is above tree line. It's subject to avalanche danger. Some of these routes require rappels. It's terrain that's on par with anything in the Wasatch or the greater ranges of the world, the Sierras. It's a little bit smaller in elevation, and it doesn't get quite as much snow, but it's just as rugged. And I found these mountains, and it was just like a feast. I was like looking in this terrain, looking at the community. The East Coast ski community is one of the most psyched communities for how much bad weather and bad snow we deal with on a seasonal basis. And they do not complain at all. They are always out there. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. I want to be in these mountains, and I want to ski everything that's here. And I'd always been an adventurous person. I always love to do new stuff. I feel like I'm most engaged when I'm kind of solving the puzzle of figuring out how to do a new thing. And I had this unique background where not only was I a strong skier, but now I was starting to become a strong climber. And I was in this terrain all the time. And in 2020, um, there was a guidebook finally published for the Mount Washington region. This guy, Kurt, who is just super passionate about the skiing out here, decided to fill the void in the one thing we hadn't had for the community yet, which is a guidebook. And it also quantified the skiing for the first time. Now there's 91 ski routes, and there's a 92nd route in the book, but it's just an uphill. This ice climb called Pinnacle Gully, and it really put it into perspective. Where now all these kind of nameless things are things that had multiple names, kind of have a common name, um, and you kind of know what the boundaries are. Where does it start and end? How many are there? And it put it into a framework for me where it gave me the crazy idea of what if I tried to ski everything in this book? And I don't know if I'm the first to have thought of that. Um, but I don't see why you would have skied a lot of the things that are in here unless they were on a list somewhere. And prior to this point, that didn't exist. So I really kind of stewed over it for a long time, and I ended up announcing my plan to do it in 2021. And it was a lot inspired by Caroline Gleick's project of skiing everything in this book called The Shooting Gallery out in Utah. And I remember in her documentary about that, she said something about uh, doing challenges, committing to challenges in your life that you don't think you'll be able to complete and that you
Mm.
might just surprise yourself. And I decided to give it a shot. And it was a risk because now I'd put myself out there as the person that said I was going to do it. Not that that in any way obligates me to do it, but now you've kind of become that guy. And it feels like there's some pressure to prove you're worthy of claiming such a thing because in the climbing community, the ethic is don't brag about a climb you haven't done yet. I've now bragged about um, like 83 climbs I haven't done yet or something. So I just started picking away at it slowly but surely. The first 2 seasons, I really didn't have a lot of luck. I actually skied less in the range than when I wasn't actively working on a challenge. And it got to the point where I was starting to get the thought in my head of like, you know what, at least you tried, at least you put yourself out there. And in March 2023, we had the biggest paradigm shift I could have possibly hoped for. We just had one miracle weather window where a lot of incredibly rare terrain in the White Mountains happened to form. And by form, I mean because Mount Washington is the windiest place in the world, normally the snow falls and the wind strips it from everything except for the southeast facing terrain and it deposits it into all of the southeast facing gullies. Um, so that leaves all these other aspects of the compass rose completely barren, stripped down to rocks, ice, or bushes. And if you're trying to ski something that requires a lot of snow and very specific conditions, that can be a bummer. These particular storms just kind of caked up on all of the terrain and they fell on low wind and they went through a melt freeze cycle before the strong winds came back. So it kind of locked all the snow in place and set this base that we didn't have before. And it went from, all right, we might not actually be able to do this to around the clock, just every day skiing something new. I was driving to and from the mountains. I was squeezing in classes wherever I could. I was skipping classes. I was literally at one point in the grocery store having just done this huge day in the mountains, getting a message that another route that is incredibly rare was in great condition and then like dropping everything, like putting my basket on the ground, texting somebody in the grocery store to meet at 6 a.m. the next day and then go ski it. And we just did that for about a month straight. And in that season, I managed to ski all of the terrain on Mount Webster and all of the terrain in Huntington Ravine, which those are the two hardest zones to finish in the book. So it wasn't really that I had finished the project. I still had a lot of work to do. But now I had no more excuses. I'd done what I perceived to be the two hardest zones in the range, every gully, top to bottom. So now it was just about follow through. And I'll admit I underestimated the follow through a little bit. This season was definitely a very intense season. Um, and we added the pressure of a film crew this year. So once it got to the point where I was reasonably certain that I could finish this project, I pitched it as a film. And we really, like, I must have been tapped into something divine because the odds that we skied the things we skied, not only just in general, but happened to have been able to do on the days we booked the film crew, remarkable. It really was 1 in a million chance we did any of the things we did up there. So it was the best I could have possibly asked for, and I feel very fortunate to have pulled it off.
That is truly amazing. Like absolutely amazing. How did that feel, Rob, when that journey happened and when you went up there to watch him do the last climb?
It was, I had a lot of, time to think because so I went to this sort of the bowl area where we had to skin up, and then the part that he was actually skiing is like another 1,000 feet up or something. And it really, outside of my area of comfort, I couldn't do it. It was, and they end up skiing this really narrow rock lined, it's called a couloir, and if you if you fall, there's a lot of consequence. Like it's a no fall zone. So I stayed at the bottom and watched this whole thing. So I had a lot of time, and with the film crew setting up, it was kind of a slow progression. And I'm just rethinking this. This journey started with a random day when I take him to this little ski hill called Neshoba Valley ski area, which is near our house, and it's a desperate attempt to find something to do when our house was combustible and everybody was crying and upset during Christmas break, and then we end up from that going to Mount Wachusett in Massachusetts, to Loon in New Hampshire, to Stowe in Vermont, to discovering the mountains out west, to the times we spent in Big Sky, which is in Montana, special place. Each of these mountains, every time we went, he'd have this list of runs he had to do, and if he couldn't do it, everything would fall apart. And for me as the parent, I'm seeing this little progress with him, and we have this thing that just was okay, and it was so much better than anything else we were doing. But it was always volatile too, because he put so much pressure on himself to accomplish these special runs that we would go out sometimes and the snow wouldn't be perfect, or a lot of times when he was really little, he if I couldn't do it with him because I wasn't as good as he was, he couldn't really do it either, or we couldn't find a guide who would take him, and we'd have some disappointments. And but somehow we got through and we'd get to the next one. And then all of a sudden we were in Chile, and we did this whole South America trip, and we discovered, traveling internationally, and that, it's winter, down there when it's summer for us. So we were going there in August and bringing all our ski stuff on a plane in August, and meeting just the craziest people that you could imagine, that would go give up a month of summer and go skiing in South America, and just falling in love with that place, to Antarctica, which, I thought was like sled dogs, and I when he proposed it, I laughed at him, thinking, like, how are we going to go to Antarctica? How am I possible? Like, in what universe? And we end up there, and he takes me on my first backcountry expedition there, and I'm huffing and puffing trying to climb and not get killed, but we just kept always exceeding our expectations, and the next thing would be good. And I was just seeing this different kid, and it was changing me in the same respect. I was all a different guy. I was discovering this love for the outdoors, and really pushing yourself, and forgetting your phone and forgetting everything else. And it's just it's some of the quietest, most beautiful places on earth, and having a relationship where we just were together and we're talking on a chairlift. The chairlift conversation is special. It's just you, and you're just going up, and you have either 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or you meet new people, or you don't meet new people. And it was really special. And so then we get introduced to this whole backcountry thing, and I wasn't able to do a lot of that with him, and I had to just read his posts and watch his videos on YouTube and live vicariously through him. But that day when I'm standing there, I relived all of that and thinking, I get emotional. If you pull one thread out, maybe it would have fallen apart. If one of those days had gone poorly, or something would have, if I would have torn my ACL, or if God forbid he would have gotten hurt, everything would have fallen apart in skiing. And it might have fallen apart outside of skiing, where I was finally taking those lessons I learned as a father with him skiing to his everyday life. And it changed everything for him, because I challenged these schools. I found a doctor who got him off all this medication that he never should have been on. He never should have been in those schools in the first place. He was there because of the mistakes I made. And had it not been for skiing, I don't know if he would have ended up where he is today. And so I get emotional thinking about it, because I remember standing there when he came down and thinking, God, I got so lucky. I got so lucky as a father. If we didn't discover this thing, I I those mistakes I would have had to live with my whole life, and I still live with them. You can tell I still have a lot of guilt, but he's so special now, and he's so great now, and he's just this amazing person. He's taught me so much about eating right and being healthy and living right and thinking right, and it's changed everything in my life, and it was a special moment, and I hope it translates on film. I haven't seen it yet, but the filmmaker thought it was a pretty cool, pretty great
I
scene.
like feel bad promoting it. We don't even have a title for it yet.
No, we don't even know it's gonna be
It is in editing right now, and we got everything we needed, which is
called.
really that is the most important thing. I really, like I said, your safety has to come first, and I did a lot of processing, and I made peace with the fact that we might make this movie, and I have four things left still, but I definitely went into this season like I'm going to give this everything I have. I didn't take a job this winter. I lived full time in my van in the White Mountains and just watched the weather and committed to putting myself there to strike when the iron was hot, or in this case, cold and stable. And we managed to pull off not just the two things we wanted to film, but the five other things that I still hadn't skied yet. And I struggle to put it into words. I feel like I didn't do a good job explaining this project and just how complicated it was, but it really you can't do it unless you get obsessed. You've
Mm.
got to live and breathe this, and you've got to know every corner of the mountain like the back of your hand. You need to have a strategy to solve the puzzle that every line presents, and you need to be there when the time is right. You can't be halfway. You really can't be like, oh, I really should do my homework or study for this test tomorrow, or down in Massachusetts, I don't really want to drive back up. It's really like, all right, it's go time. Nothing else matters except we need to do this.
And what he's not
And
telling you is you may be 4 hours into a hike, standing over something and saying, "You know what? It's not today's not the day. Like, I don't like the way this is setting up. I can see the ice," or, and you have to pull out and say, "Not today." And it's not even see it from the road. Some of them you can, but most of them you can't. You have to get there to figure out that it's unsafe that day. And he made some really good tactical decisions, and I think that's the hardest thing, especially when you if you're with other people and somebody has to be the one to say that this is not safe. There's a lot of consequence back there. I said that before, but people die in the mountain range all the time. The weather is brutal, and if you fall, it's not like a ski resort. They don't, it's not picked clean and it's groomed, or it's you don't know what's underneath. There's rocks and there's
I
crevasses
mean,
and
some of the terrain you're skiing above ice climbing terrain. You're skiing above um, 70-foot rappels. You know, it's not really like the type of thing where you can uh, just fall and get up. Some of the terrain you're going to maybe not have the opportunity to ski or breathe again if you fall off of it.
which is terrifying as a parent. But I made peace with it long ago. That the sport he chose, especially in the backcountry where avalanche is a very common occurrence, you know, he needs this to be happy. He couldn't live without it, and it changed his life. And I know he'll always make good tactical decisions, but there's a lot of risk, but there's risk in everything, right? And if you don't take that risk, you're never going to live. And I think he's taught me a lot about that as well. It's the only way to live, really, is to take calculated risks and to reap those rewards. And he's a living, breathing example of that, God knows.
I love that. I love this story. I love there are so many components here. The father son relationship, kind of the parallel of the journey, how it started and how sort of the system that we have set up was not serving him. And had you not done something differently, you know, who knows, like you said, where this all would have gone, but you did. And then he had the courage to run with it. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. And one of the things, like I said, that I love promoting and why we created this platform, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I really, really would love to hear the answer to this question. from each of you is, what do you feel the wilderness and that backcountry and this whole experience has awoken in you? What did it change in you?
You want to go, Ray?
Sure. I mean, more than anything, um, the backcountry and the mountains are an excellent teacher in that you really can't get anywhere you want to be in the world without putting in effort. And I think the beauty in climbing mountains is that it is an instant gratification feedback loop, that effort does translate to reward, and the amount of effort you're willing to put in translates to how much reward you can experience. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are averse to challenge, averse to risk, and I don't even mean physical risk, but emotional risk, risk of embarrassment, risk of having to deal with the feeling of failure. Um, but only on the other side of risk can we experience gain. And I don't know how you can be in the mountains and engage with these challenges and not become a stronger person with a healthier mindset on the other side.
I'll just show you. So this is our book, Without Restraint, and the way we wrote it in the book, we wrote separately. So it's both of our versions run concurrently throughout the book, and there's a lot of humor in my version because I was this, and Louise, I grew up in Revere. I was this, short, fat Italian guy who was, watching the Red Sox and Patriots and thinking I was, living a full life, and that was, what people did, right? And I'd skied a couple times as a kid, but it wasn't really something that we did in Revere a lot. And and all of a sudden I'm thrust into this thing, and because I have a kid who's suffering, and I can't fix it, and I'm just doing this thing because it makes him happy. And then somewhere along the way, I realized that maybe it's helping, and maybe I didn't have to fix him to begin with. Maybe this is really him, and this other thing that I'm seeing and worrying about is I created. I should have just let him be, and this is what he would be. But all along the way, I'm changing because I'm being forced to go to these places and challenge myself physically, especially when we started doing backcountry stuff when I had to climb, and I had to really get outside my comfort zone and look bad a lot and fail a lot and get back up and it's weird. As a dad, he was so much better than me at everything, and really my life was in his hands a lot of times because he was so knowledgeable about the mountain. He would memorize all of the trails. I was like the guy who wouldn't ask for directions. I never knew the names of any trails. I would get lost all the time, and it really became, for him, I think it was probably more stressful than he let on because he's towing around this slob, trying not to kill him, and we're trying to have this sort of father son dynamic along the way, and it really changed everything. And a little bit about the book. When Ryan sort of came off medication, it was due to one doctor. His name has changed in the book, but his name is Dr. Marcus Favero, who really looked at Ryan's physical health and said, these medications that are purportedly helping his mental health, oh, by the way, they're killing him. And you really need, his physical health was so bad. He was so heavy. His cholesterol was terrible. His heart rate was terrible. He comes off all these medicines and he totally changes his life. Ryan was the first person to talk about, our food is poison, and you don't drink enough water, and you need to get in the right headspace. And I used to laugh at him doing yoga on the floor, and he was doing all these breathing exercises, and I'm like, what are you doing? And now I'm doing all of it because I watched the way he's just changed physically and mentally, and he's just he's at peace that in a way that I don't see a lot back in Boston with the people we deal with every day and the people I interact with every day. He's just, and I think the outdoors was the gateway to that. It really was to see where people can be happy and nobody cares what you drive or what you do for a living. It just, that's one thing I like about skiing. Like, you go out there and the guy with a helmet and goggles could be a billionaire. It could be some guy who, worked nights so he could pay for his lift ticket. interesting. It's a very it's a sport where it doesn't really matter. It's we're all in this just to enjoy it. So again, really long answer to a short question, but I hope it was a colorful answer. Nothing else.
Yeah, that could be the takeaway right there. I mean, if you if you get into the outdoors, it is a mirror. You will see what kind of fitness you have, and I feel like that's the sneaky truth is you realize you want to be better at the thing you're passionate about doing, and you start eating right and start exercising and stretching and taking care of your body, and then you realize how great all of those things feel. So it can be the gateway drug to a better life that a lot of people need. That could be those are the risks that I want people to take. If
Yeah.
you're scared to take a yoga class or like to take a ski lesson and you know don't want to like be the adult that's like having to hold on to the instructor to not fall over, like shed all of that. You'll be a lot happier if you just try it and accept that you have to be a beginner at it. I definitely don't think everybody needs to ski all 91 routes in presidential skiing. If it's not your absolute dream, honestly don't recommend it. It's there's a lot of bad skiing that you have to do to do a thing like that. Um, but yeah, I just hope everybody gets out there and moves their body and takes a chance to live a better life, even in the smallest ways possible. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. You don't have to be a superhuman. Just try something new and don't be afraid to try things that you don't know if you'll be able to complete.
I love that. I love that so much. And I'm a living testament of that. Once I found the outdoors, my life changed too. So I mirror that message. I love that. Thank you both so much for being on. We're going to link your book in the show notes and in the description. And when this documentary has a title and comes out, I hope you will both be back and
Would love to.
share and tell us all about it because I know I'm waiting for it to watch it. And for all of our beautiful free spirits and our listeners, today's story from Ryan and Rob reminds us that something healing doesn't have to happen in a clinic. It happens on a mountainside if that's what you choose. It is important that we remember that love, instinct, and wild belief can take us further than any expert could have ever imagined. And if this conversation moved you, stay connected, subscribe to the Flying Upstream newsletter. We will also be featuring them there. So you'll get a little bit more insight about Ryan and Robin there. And we will also be exploring the soul led paths that don't follow the rules, but always lead us home. Thank you for listening. And remember, keep listening to the truth, to which doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come by receiving permission from others. And of course, keep flying upstream. Until next time.